Hello and welcome to my YouTube. This YouTube is titled Things We All Believe That Just Aren't True. Popular Myths That Are Just Untrue. I will confess that many of the things you're going to hear I have believed all of my life, and I'm 80 years old. So be prepared for a lot of surprises. Let's get started. Fortune cookies came from China. That's what we call them, Chinese fortune cookies, right? Wrong. They were first developed by Japanese immigrants in California around 1904. So they're not ancient cookies from China. Cracking your knuckles causes arthritis. No, that's just not true. There is no medical evidence, and people have looked at this, that says cracking your knuckles will do any permanent damage to you. It's irritating, but it's not medically dangerous. Food dropped on the floor is safe to eat if it's picked up within 5 seconds. You know, the old 5-second rule, right? No, that's not true. Bacteria can instantly attach itself to any food product dropped on the floor. It doesn't have to wait 5 seconds at all. Napoleon was unusually short. Now, I've heard this all my life, and my wife was a French teacher. It's just not true. He was 5'7", which was average for a man in the 1800s. European men ranged from 5'4" to 5'7". It was the English who spread stories about how short he was to embarrass him. And remember, the English and the French hated each other and fought many, many wars. The Great Wall of China is the only man-made object visible from space. I've heard this a lot. Unfortunately, it's just not true. The astronauts have verified this. Roads, rivers, canals, bridges, cities, they are all visible from space. In fact, it's usually very, very difficult to even spot the Great Wall of China without magnification. How many times have you heard this? George Washington had wooden teeth. We all have heard that one. Nope, wasn't true. George Washington did not have wooden teeth. His dentures were made of lead, gold, hippopotamus ivory, the teeth of various animals, including horses and donkey teeth, and human teeth, possibly bought from slaves or poor people. Because ivory teeth quickly became stained, they may have had the appearance of wood to observers. I'll let you judge yourself. Here is George Washington's teeth. Yes, those are George Washington's teeth. They're on exhibit at Mount Vernon, his home outside of Washington, D.C. These are his dentures. Lightning never strikes the same place twice. You know what? Tell that to the people that work in the Empire State Building, because the Empire State Building is struck about 23 times a year. It certainly can strike more than once in any spot on Earth. Bats are blind. We've all heard that. Well, not really. They do have pretty good vision. But think about this. They spend a lot of their life flying in the dark or inside pitch black caves, so they have this built-in sonar. That's why people thought they couldn't see, is because their sonar is so good. But they still have eyes, and they can see in daylight. An ostrich buries their head in the sand when they're scared. How many times have you heard that? Unfortunately, that's just not true. They have never done that. They do bury their eggs sometime in nest in the sand. So it may be people were observed watching them dig the holes in the sand and mistakenly thought they were hiding their heads. But it's not true. Oh, my mother told me this. You lose most body heat through your head, and that's why she always insisted I wear a hat when I went out in the wintertime. No, that's just not true. You don't lose any more heat through your head than you do any other part of your body. Your scalp accounts for about 8% of your body's surface, and that's about how much heat you lose, about 8%. You must wait an hour after eating before you go swimming to prevent cramping. Now, my mother insisted on this. As I was growing up, I was never allowed to go to the swimming pool less than an hour after eating. But here's the reality. This is simply not true. Let me tell you a personal story. When I was in college, I had a swimming professor in college who told us, in teaching swimming for 37 years, often right after lunchtime, he had never had a student get the cramps while swimming. And so there is no medical evidence that you will get cramps if you swim within an hour of eating. Now, it might be true if you overate and got stuffed, that could be uncomfortable. But eating does not cause cramps when swimming. Oh, I've heard this all my life. We only use 10% of our brains, right? Nope, there is no medical evidence. This is a motivational speaker's ploy that can be traced back to the early 1900s to encourage people to live up to their full potential. Studies of brain activity have provided no medical evidence that only 10% of the brain is used. Oh, all mothers believe this. Sugar makes children hyperactive, right? Nope. Several studies have shown that sugar doesn't cause children to be more hyper. Some studies demonstrated that parents who thought their child was given sugar believed them to be more hyper even when they weren't given sugar, demonstrating the misconception parents sometimes have about their own children. If you go outside with wet hair on a cold day, you'll catch cold. My mother certainly drilled this into me. Colds are caused by viruses, which you can't get just from being outside in the cold. You may feel sick if you're outside all day in the cold or rain, runny nose, chills, fatigue, but it's not because of a virus. It's because you can experience the same symptoms when you are chilled as when you are sick. So that's what caused the confusion. Breakfast is the most important meal of the day. I've heard this all my life. Not true. Breakfast is actually one of the 3 most important meals of the days. Our bodies need good nutrition throughout the day, but breakfast is usually the one most often skipped, and it shouldn't be. But medically speaking, it's no more important than the other 2 meals. I'm sure the cereal people will not be happy with that one. Different areas of the tongue detect bitter, sour, salty, or sweet. And I'd heard this all of my life, that I taste sour here and I taste sweet on the tip, and this is known as the tongue map. Unfortunately, it's not true. All taste regions of the tongue can detect all 5 basic tastes. This tongue map idea came from misinterpretations of a 1901 German study, which unfortunately got spread in textbooks. We have 5 senses: smell, hearing, touch, sight, and taste. We all know that, right? Just 5. Not exactly. We have 23. Sight, smell, taste, hearing, touch, balance. Body needs time, pain, fatigue, pressure. We feel empathy, fear, tiredness, thirst, and satiation. So medical science has detected and measured 23 different senses we have. Undercover cops have to identify themselves as police, right? Wrong. There is no law that says they have to do that. It's only on TV or in the movies that they pretend that these cops have to identify themselves. Not in real life. They can stay undercover. Oh, I've heard this one. You know, as smart as he was, Einstein failed math in school, right? Wrong. He never failed school. In fact, he was excellent in math all of his life. What he did do is at the age of 16, he failed the exam to be admitted to the Swiss Polytechnical School. The first time he took the test, but he retook it and he passed it. That's the only thing he ever failed in his life. Vikings wore horned helmets into battle. We all know this. We've all seen these Viking helmets and how impressive they are. Unfortunately, it's absolutely untrue. Horned Viking helmets were created in the 19th century for a Wagner opera. So it's just these opera singers that wear horned Viking helmets. Real Vikings never wore them. Would have been dangerous in combat. Bulls are angered by the color red, and that's why bullfighting capes are red, right? They see this red and it just enrages them. Nice theory, but here's the reality. Bulls are colorblind. They are red-green colorblind. So they don't charge because the cape is red. They charge because the matador is waving it at them, and they react to motion. Women were forced to wear chastity belts in the 16th century. Men did not trust their women when they went away, for example, going away to war. So they put these contraptions on them to make sure they couldn't have intercourse with any other man, right? Not really. Chastity belts were invented in the mid-1800s to prevent, and I quote, dangerous masturbation. So in medieval times, these things did not even exist, let alone did men put them on their wives. Drinking coffee dehydrates you. I've heard this, even though I'm a coffee drinker. It's just not true. Caffeine will dehydrate you, but the water in the coffee will offset the dehydration effect of the caffeine. So the net is you don't lose hydration. You need to wait 24 hours before police will file a missing person report. We've all seen this on TV. You know, a distraught father goes into the police station and the police says, well, how long has your child been missing? And you say, well, there's 6 hours. And the cop always says, well, I'm sorry, but we have to wait 24 hours before we can file a missing persons report. That is nonsense. That is only on TV or in the movies. Real police will immediately take a missing persons report. The left brain works differently than the right brain. You know, we've heard all of this, left brain people and right brain, and the left brain is for analytics and logic, and the right brain is for creativity. It's not true. There is no medical evidence that one side of the brain can do something different or better than the other hemisphere. It's just not true. A fatwa is a Muslim death sentence on a person. And we've heard this, that a Muslim cleric will issue a fatwa declaring that a person should be killed. It's not true at all. A fatwa is just a non-binding advisory opinion from a Muslim scholar who's called a mufti about Muslim law. It has nothing to do with non-believers or death sentences. Tariffs are good for the economy because they protect American companies. There is a unanimous consensus among economists that import tariffs have a negative effect on the economic growth and welfare and harm consumers through higher prices by more than they benefit domestic producers. Additionally, import tariffs are taxes paid to the government by the American importers, not by exporting countries or manufacturers, as is claimed by some, including President Donald Trump. Oh, I've heard this all my life. Eating turkey at Thanksgiving causes drowsiness in the afternoon because of tryptophan. I can't even pronounce that word. Tryptophan. It's this chemical in the turkey meat that supposedly makes us drowsy. At least that was what I've always heard. Turkey meat is not particularly high in tryptophan. I wish I could figure out how to pronounce that word. Tryptophan, that's it, tryptophan. Anyway, turkey is not higher in tryptophan and does not cause more drowsiness than any other food. Fish, cheese, chicken, and nuts are higher in tryptophan than turkey. Drowsiness after a large meal, such as at Christmas or Thanksgiving dinner, generally comes from overeating and drinking alcohol. Merry Christmas. Happy Thanksgiving. Bourbon can only be called bourbon if it's Bourbon can only be called bourbon if it's distilled in Kentucky. So the only true bourbon has to be made in Kentucky, right? Nope. Bourbon whiskey does not have to be distilled only in Kentucky. Bourbon is also distilled in states such as New York, California, Wyoming, and Washington, as the legal requirement is only that it be made in the United States. However, Kentucky does produce most of the bourbon. Storing bread in the refrigerator makes it stay fresh longer. My grandmother believed this, my mother believes this, my wife believes this, because right now if you go into my kitchen and open the refrigerator, you'll find a loaf of bread. Sounds good. Storing bread in the refrigerator makes it go stale faster than leaving it at room temperature. It does, however, slow mold growth if the bread is very old. According to the Bible, there were 3 wise men at Jesus' birth. The Bible never actually mentions 3 wise men at Jesus' birth. The idea came from there being 3 gifts mentioned: gold, frankincense, and myrrh. However, in the 8th century, they came up with the names for 3 kings. Somehow, the 3 wise men were changed to 3 kings. Don't take my word for it. Go get your King James Bible and read it for yourself. It's only in 2 books of the New Testament, the story of the birth of Jesus. A drink of alcohol will warm your body on a cold day. Sounds good to me. Unfortunately, it's not true. What is true is that it dilates the blood vessels near the surface of your skin, and you have the sensation of warmth, but that's only a few millimeters deep on your skin. It has nothing to do with the inner warmth of your body. Taking large amounts of vitamins is healthy. The more vitamins, the better, right? Wrong. Let me tell you the reality. Rather than helping, evidence suggests that taking large amounts of certain vitamins can be harmful. An example of this would be taking large amounts of vitamin A or large doses of vitamin B. Excess vitamin A has been shown to cause liver damage, hair loss, bone and muscle pain, and birth defects. Excess vitamin D has been shown to cause bone loss, vomiting, confusion, and loss of appetite. So be careful. Don't overdo it. Coca-Cola created the Jolly Santa Claus image in 1930 advertisements. That's when this picture first came into being. And that's certainly something that I believed for many, many years. It wasn't true. The common image of Santa Claus as a large, jolly man in red garments was not created by Coca-Cola Company as an advertisement tool. Santa Claus had already taken this form in American popular culture by the late 1800s, long before Coca-Cola used his image in the 1930s. The Chevrolet Nova didn't sell in Central and South America because the word Nova in Spanish means doesn't go. Who would buy a car that was named doesn't go? At least that's what the popular myth was. It wasn't true. The Chevy Nova sold very well in Latin American markets. General Motors did not rename the car. While it's true that Novas does mean doesn't go in Spanish, Nova was easily understood to mean new. All cooks I know believe this. Searing meat seals in moisture. Okay, so the first thing we do is we sear that steak, right? Got to seal in that moisture. Searing does not seal in moisture in meat. It causes it to lose some moisture. Meat is seared to brown it and to affect its color, flavor, and texture, not to seal in moisture. Sushi means raw fish. We all know what real sushi is, right? Nope. Although most sushi contains some form of seafood, the term does not mean raw fish, as it refers to the vinegar-prepared rice the dish contains. Nor is fish a defining ingredient of sushi. Some sushi contains no fish, and in fact, most of the sushi I eat doesn't have any fish in it. So it's the vinegar rice that's called sushi, not the fish. The Caesar salad was named after Julius Caesar, and it was invented in Rome, Italy. We all know that. I mean, why else would you call it Caesar salad if it wasn't invented in Italy? And we all know who Caesar was, right? Wrong. Caesar salad was invented by Cesare Cardini, an Italian-American restaurateur in Tijuana, Mexico in 1924. And here's a picture of his restaurant, Caesar's, in Tijuana. Microwave ovens cook food from the inside out. I certainly believe this. Unfortunately, it's not true. Microwave ovens do not cook food from the inside out. Microwaves can only penetrate approximately 1 to 1.5 inches into most foods. The inside portions of thicker foods are mainly heated by heat conducted from the outer layers. So it's just like the old-fashioned oven. It heats the outside and the outside cooks the inside. Microwave ovens give off dangerous radiation, and there are people that certainly believe this. Not true. The radiation produced by a microwave oven is similar to visible light or radio waves. It therefore does not have the cancer risk associated with ionizing radiation such as X-rays and high-energy particles, nor does it render the food radioactive. The word Xmas originated as a secular plan to take Christ out of Christmas. Some people will say, well, they do this because they don't want to use Christ. They don't want to call it Christmas. That's why they came up with this X. Just the opposite. Xmas did not originate as a secular plan to take Christ out of Christmas. The X represents the Greek letter chi, the first letter of Christos. That's the Greek word for Christ. And it's found in the chi rho symbol since the 4th century. In English, X was first used as a scribal abbreviation for Christ in the year 1021 AD. Early Christians actually used the X as shorthand to represent Christ. So it goes back for centuries that X stood for Christ, putting Christ very much back into Christmas. Interpol agents are international policemen. They can go anywhere in the world and arrest you, right? Wrong. Let me tell you what Interpol really is. Employees of the international police organization Interpol cannot conduct investigations, arrest criminals, or use fake passports. Interpol's role is facilitating international communication between law enforcement agencies of sovereign states. In other words, Interpol helps the FBI in the United States deal with the Secret Service in Israel or the police in London. They foster and help communications and spread the word amongst police agencies around the world. They don't go out and find people and arrest them. Undocumented immigrants have a higher crime rate in American society, right? You just can't trust those. They're causing all kinds of problems. Wrong. Undocumented immigrants in the United States substantially have a lower crime rate than U.S.-born immigrants. Immigrants are 60% less likely to be incarcerated than U.S.-born citizens. They're very law-abiding. They don't want to get in trouble. For this all my life, it's illegal to shout fire in a crowded theater. Sounds good. It is not illegal in the United States to shout fire in a crowded theater. Although this is often given as an example of speech that is not protected by the First Amendment, it is not now, nor has it ever been, a binding law. So you can go ahead and yell fire, at least legally, but not morally. We all know this. Condemned prisoners on death row are always entitled to a last meal of their choice. I don't know how many times I've watched this on a TV show or in a movie. Their last meal. And I've read many police reports or stories about condemned men on death row and what they ate in their last meal. So they have a right, right? Last meal requests do not have to be fulfilled. States have various restrictions on what can be requested, up to not permitting last meals at all. So if a state wants to, they can say, tough, you're getting bread and water. The mafia drowned people using cement shoes. In other words, they would embed their feet in blocks of cement and dump them in the river. Neither the mafia nor any other criminal organization regularly used or have used cement shoes to drown their victims. There are only 2 documented cases of this method being used in murders, one in 1964 and one in 2016, although in the former, the victim had concrete blocks tied to his legs rather than being enclosed in concrete. So it makes a good story. Yeah, the mafia is going to put concrete shoes on you. Just never happened. The president has a red telephone on his desk to call directly to Moscow. We all know this is true. The hotline, right? Yeah, the hotline. It's this phone. It's this phone, and it sits right on the president's desk, and he can pick it up and he can talk to the president of Russia. Wrong. Although popularly known as the red telephone, the Moscow-Washington hotline was never a telephone line, nor were red phones ever used. The first implementation of the hotline used teletype equipment, which was replaced by a fax machine in 1988. But since 2008, the hotline has been a secure computer link over which the 2 countries exchange email. Moreover, the hotline links the Kremlin to the Pentagon, not the White House. So the guys in the Pentagon can send emails to the guys in the Kremlin. That's the hotline. Embalming is legally required in the United States. You cannot be buried without being embalmed, right? Wrong. Embalming is not legally required in the United States. In fact, the Federal Trade Commission passed a rule in 1984 forbidding making this claim to prevent the funeral industry from promoting the misconception for financial gain. In other words, the funeral directors told everybody, oh, you got to have him embalmed. I mean, you just have to do that. It's the law. No, it isn't. I believe this to be true. The song Puff the Magic Dragon is about taking drugs. Great Peter, Paul, and Mary song. Not true. The song Puff the Magic Dragon is not about drugs. Both of the song's co-writers consistently and emphatically denied this interpretation throughout their lives, stating that the song is solely about the loss of childhood innocence. Nothing to do with drugs or marijuana. The Immaculate Conception is the Catholic doctrine that Mary conceived and gave birth to Jesus while remaining a virgin. Now, I'm not Catholic, but this is exactly what I understood the Immaculate Conception to mean. But here's the reality. The Roman Catholic dogma of the Immaculate Conception is unrelated to the Christian doctrine that Mary conceived and gave birth to Jesus while remaining a virgin. The Immaculate Conception is the belief that Mary was free of original sin from the moment of her own conception by her parents, Joachim and Anne. A less common mistake is to think that the Immaculate Conception means that Mary herself was conceived without sexual intercourse. So it has to do with original sin, not the virgin birth. The 7 deadly sins are listed in the New Testament: lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. It's right there in the Bible. Nope, it's found nowhere in the Bible. The 7 deadly sins originated in the Egyptian desert, created in the year 390 AD by Evagrius Ponticus, a Greek Christian monk who lived from 345 to 399 AD. So 400 years after the birth of Christ, this monk out in the middle of the desert came up with the idea of the 7 deadly sins. It is not found in the Bible anywhere. The Quran promises martyrs will be given 72 virgins in heaven. Now, I'm not a Muslim and I won't pretend to know anything about the Quran, but I did my research on this. Here's what I found out. The Quran states that companions, who are called horai, are given to all people in heaven, men and women, martyrs or not. The Arabic words translates as virgin in Western media are more accurately translated as angels or heavenly beings. And here's an old painting showing these horai. Horai are depicted as intensely beautiful, pure, and untouched companions created especially for the rewards of all believers in the afterlife. In other words, they're beautiful angels who will help you and take care of you, whether you're a man or a woman. Baseball was invented by Abner Doubleday in Cooperstown, New York, and he was a Union officer. Heard that all of my life. Baseball is actually believed to have evolved from the bat and ball game called rounders, and it first took its modern form in New York City. It had nothing to do with Abner Doubleday. I've heard this all my life. The pyramids of Egypt were constructed with slave laborers. All these poor slaves and the slave master whipping them. Nope. Archaeological evidence shows that the laborers were a combination of skilled workers and local farmers working in the off-season with the participants paid in high-quality food and tax exemptions. Archaeologists have also found the towns these workers lived in while they worked on the pyramids. The galleys, those Roman ships in Roman times, were commonly operated by chained slaves or prisoners. You know, you ever see Ben-Hur, the movie? Yeah, we all know that it was these poor prisoners were chained down there that had to row these ships. Nope. Roman galleys were actually rowed by paid laborers and soldiers. Tutankhamun's tomb was inscribed with a curse on those who disturbed it. So in other words, when they broke into this tomb in the late 1920s, they found a curse that said anyone who disturbs his tomb would die. And ironically, 3 or 4 men involved with the discovery of King Tut's tombs did die unnatural deaths within the next few years, but there was no curse found on the walls. The King Tut tomb curse was invented in the 20th century by Marie Corelli. She was a novelist. Julius Caesar was born via cesarean section, and that's where we get the word cesarean birth, right? So this famous man was born this way. That's how we get cesarean. Julius Caesar was not born via cesarean section. Such a procedure would have been 100% fatal to the mother at the time. And Caesar's mother was still alive when he was 45 years old. So nope, it had nothing to do with Julius Caesar. Iron maidens were used for torture in the Middle Ages. I mean, these god-awful contraptions. I mean, look at these spices. So they'd put a man in here and then close these doors, and these stakes, steel stakes, would go pierce him. Or they'd put a man inside here and close the doors, and then they would throw this thing in a fire and they would roast him to death. I've seen it in the movies. I saw it in the movie The Three Musketeers. The Iron Maiden, terrible middle-aged device. There is no evidence that Iron Maidens were even invented in the Middle Ages. Instead, they were pieced together in the 18th century from several artifacts found in museums, arsenals, and the like, to create spectacular objects intended for commercial exhibition at traveling road shows. In other words, they were carnival sideshows just put together out of spare parts. Medieval European scholars from the 9th to the 16th century believed that the earth was flat. They believed you could just go right off the edge. Nope, not true. Medieval European scholars did not believe the earth was flat. Scholars have known the earth is spherical since at least the 6th century BC. I've heard this all my life. Marie Antoinette said, "Let them eat cake," when she heard that the French peasantry were starving for lack of bread. Oh, how evil. Not true. Marie Antoinette did not say let them eat cake when she heard that the French peasantry were starving due to a shortage of bread. The phrase was first published by Rousseau's Confessions, written when Marie Antoinette was only 9 years old. And it wasn't attributed to her just to, quote, a great princess. It was falsely attributed to her in 1843 by enemies of the king, her husband. Women accused of witchcraft were burned at the stake during the Salem witch trials in America in 1693. This one gets personal for me. People accused of witchcraft were not burned at the stake during the Salem witch trials. Of the accused, 19 people convicted of witchcraft were executed by hanging. At least 5 died in prison, and one man, Giles Corey, was crushed to death by a pile of stones while trying to extract a confession from him. Giles Corey was crushed by piling stones on top of him. Now here's my story. When I was in college, I played that man, Giles Corey, in the stage play The Crucible, written by Arthur Miller. And I walked around campus for 2 weeks with my hair dyed bright white to look like the old man, Giles Corey. And I got teased in every class that I went into when suddenly overnight my hair turned white. This was the character I was trying to portray, Giles Corey. And what they really did is, here he is, and they have this board on him, and they piled these rocks on top of him, crushing him, trying to get him to confess to being a witch. Now, in the play, they closed the curtain. I got under this board, and of course the board didn't move, but the audience didn't know that. And they had these stones that the rest of the cast picked up and piled on top of me. Well, the stones were made out of styrofoam. They weighed a few ounces. Of course, the audience didn't know that. And so they piled these stones on top of me, and I yelled and screamed and uttered all kinds of vile things at them. So that's my connection to the witches of Salem. I played Giles Corey. Heard this all my life. George Washington said, "I cannot tell a lie" when being caught cutting down his father's cherry tree. We all know this story, right? George Washington did not say, "I cannot tell a lie" when being caught cutting down his father's cherry tree. Both the phrase and the tree cutting were a fabricated story created by one of Washington's biographers, Mason Locke Weems, to portray him as exceptionally honest. So the story was totally made up. Didn't happen. Heard this all my life. Benjamin Franklin proposed that the wild turkey be used as the symbol for the United States instead of the bald eagle. Well, here's the real story. Benjamin Franklin did not propose that the wild turkey be used as the symbol for the United States instead of the bald eagle. While he did serve on a commission that tried to design a seal after the Declaration of Independence, his proposal was an image of Moses parting the Red Sea. His objections to the eagle as a national symbol and preference for the turkey were stated in a 1784 letter to his daughter in response to the Society of the Cincinnati's use of the eagle. But he never expressed that sentiment publicly. And here's the seal. And it says, "Rebellions to tyrants is obedience to God." And up here is Moses parting the Red Sea. Has nothing to do with eagles and turkeys. This is his daughter. I heard this. The nose of the Great Sphinx of Giza was shot off by Napoleon's troops during the French campaign in Egypt in 1798 to 1801. That's the way I heard it, and I absolutely believed it. Yeah, those probably drunken French troops got their artillery out and shot off the nose, right? No, the nose of the Great Sphinx of Giza was not shot off by Napoleon's troops during the French campaign in Egypt. It has been missing since at least the 10th century, 800 years before Napoleon came to Egypt. So it just wore off. Cowboy hats were always the preferred hat in the Western American frontier. I mean, that's just the way it always was, right? Wrong. Cowboy hats were not initially popular in the Western American frontier. with derby and bowler hats being the typical headgear of choice. Heavy marketing of the Stetson Boss of the Plains, that was the name of the hat, modeled in the years following the American Civil War, was the primary driving force behind the cowboy hat's popularity. With its characteristic dented top not becoming standard until near the end of the 1800s. So the Civil War was in 1860s, and it was another 30 or 40 years later before cowboy hats became. Can you imagine the cowboys riding the range wearing the bowlers? Doesn't quite look right, does it? The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 was caused by Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over a lantern. Heard that all my life. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 was not caused by Mrs. O'Leary's cow kicking over a lantern. A newspaper reporter later admitted to having invented the story to make colorful copy. Just made it up. The electrocution of Topsy the elephant was an anti-alternating current demonstration organized by Thomas A. Edison. Now, I need to give you a little American history here. There was a big fight in America between what type of electricity should we be sending into our homes. Should it be AC, alternating current, or DC, direct current? Now, Thomas Edison believed that AC was very dangerous. He believed that Americans should use DC power, the same things that comes from our batteries. And there was this elephant, Topsy, who actually was a rogue elephant. It killed several people. And so they decided to electrocute this elephant. I'm not making this up. I'm not going to show you the video. It's too horrible to watch. But this is a snapshot of this elephant being electrocuted using AC current. And the story goes that Thomas Edison did this. He electrocuted this elephant just to show how dangerous alternating current was. Interesting story. It's just not true. The electrocution of Topsy the elephant, that happened, was not an anti-alternating current demonstration organized by Thomas Edison during the War of the Currents. That's what they called them. The AC guys versus the DC guys. Edison was never at Luna Park, and the electrocution of Topsy took place 10 years after the War of Currents. In other words, the AC versus DC, that was all over. And obviously we know that AC won. I mean, our homes have alternating currents. This myth may stem from the fact that the recording of the event was produced by the Edison Film Company. So that's where the idea was that Thomas Edison arranged for this elephant to be electrocuted just as a horrible demonstration of how dangerous AC current was. Not true. Edison himself had nothing to do with it. Prohibition made drinking alcohol illegal in the United States. That's what Prohibition was. It says you can't drink alcohol. Nope. Prohibition did not make drinking alcohol illegal in the United States. The 18th Amendment and the subsequent Volstead Act prohibited the production, sale, and transport of, quote, intoxicating liquors within the United States. But their possession and consumptions were never outlawed. And that's why we had speakeasies. heard this all my life. Dozens of distraught stockbrokers jumped to their deaths after the Wall Street crash of 1929. Black Tuesday, and I heard stories of all these men jumping out of their office buildings in New York cities because they had lost all their money. Interesting story. Distraught stockbrokers did not jump to their deaths in large numbers after the Wall Street crash of 1929. Although extensively reported by the news media, the overall suicide rate following the 1929 crash did not increase. It's just a story. Sounds good. The American pilot Kenneth Arnold coined the term flying saucer when describing his 1947 sightings of a UFO at Mount Rainier in the state of Washington. So the story goes, he called it a flying saucer. No, he didn't. American pilot Kenneth Arnold did not coin the term flying saucer. He did not use that phrase when describing his 1947 UFO sighting at Mount Rainier. The East Oregonian, the first newspaper to report on the incident, merely quoted him as saying the objects, quote, flew like a saucer and were, quote, flat like a pie pan. That's what he said, and they turned it into a flying saucer. The dark side of the moon receives no light from the sun, and that's why it's called the dark side. That's just not true. The dark, which is the far side of the moon, receives about the same light from the sun as the near side. It's called dark not because it never receives light, but because it had never been seen until humans sent spacecraft around the moon, since the same side of the moon always faces the Earth due to the tidal locking. So we never saw the other side of the moon. We just assumed it was dark. Rosa Parks was sitting in the front, which was the white section of the bus, during the event that made her famous. So she was sitting in the front of the bus, which was for white onlys. Here's a picture of her. And the bus driver told her, no, you got to go to the back of the bus. That's where the blacks sit. And she refused to do it. And here's the picture. Now here's the rest of the story. This picture is fake. It's really her, but it did not happen on the day of this incident. This was later set up by this newspaper man, and that's who this is. He's a newspaper man who wrote a story about her. And yeah, she's sitting in the front row. But here's the rest of the story. Rosa Parks was not sitting in the front, the white section of the bus, during the event that made her famous and incited the Montgomery bus boycott. Rather, she was sitting in the front of the back, the colored section of the bus, where African Americans were expected to sit. And she rejected an order from the driver to vacate her seat in favor of a white passengers when the white section of the bus had become full. So she was where she should have been. She was in the first row of the colored section. And the driver says, hey, the bus is full. You need to get up and give this white woman your seat. And she refused to do that. I've used this phrase myself, may you live in interesting times. And I always explained, this is an old ancient Chinese curse. And I believe that was true all my life. But here's the reality. It ain't no Chinese old curse. It was first uttered by Sir Austin Chamberlain in 1936. He's a British parliamentarian and a British executive. That's where it came from. Egg balancing is only possible on the day of the vernal equinox. That's the first day of spring. So the theory goes, on that day, the earth is tilted in such a way that you can stand an egg up like this. Sounds good to me. Egg balancing is possible on every day of the year, not just the vernal equinox. And there is no relationship between any astronomical phenomena and the ability to balance an egg. Good story, just ain't true. Well, we all know this. Lemmings usually engage in mass suicide dives off cliffs when they're migrating. Well, we've all heard about the poor little lemmings running over the cliffs and committing suicide. Heard that all my life. Just isn't true. Lemmings do not engage in mass suicidal dives off cliffs when migrating. The scenes of lemming suicides in the 1958 Disney documentary film White Wilderness, which popularized this idea, were completely fabricated. The lemmings in the films were actually purchased from Inuit children, those are Indian children, transported to the filming location in Canada and repeatedly shoved off a nearby cliff by the filmmakers to create the illusion of a mass suicide. The misconception itself is much older, dating back to at least the 19th century, though its exact origins are uncertain. So lemmings don't jump off the cliff to commit suicide. Aerodynamic theory predicts that bumblebees should not be able to fly. Heard this all my life. Not true. It is not true that aerodynamic theory predicts that bumblebees should not be able to fly. The physics of insect flight is quite well understood. The misconception appears to come from a calculation based on a fixed-wing aircraft mentioned in a 1934 book and was further popularized in the 2007 film Bee Movie. I have always understood this to be true. Diamonds are formed from highly compressed coal deep in the earth. Okay, so you get a chunk of coal and you press it really, really hard and you get a diamond. Nope. Diamonds are not formed from highly compressed coal. Almost all commercially mined diamonds were formed in the conditions of extreme heat and pressure about 93 miles below the Earth's surface. Coal is formed from prehistoric plants buried much closer to the surface, and coal is unlikely to sink below 2 miles. Most diamonds that have been dated are older than the first land plants and are therefore far, far older than coal. So coal's only 2 miles deep. Diamonds are made 93 miles deep, and they're not made out of coal. There's a special chemical added to the water in some public swimming pools that will reveal the presence of urine and catch those who urinate in the pool. Yeah, so here it is, and this guy, if he pees, this chemical turns bright blue, much to the embarrassment. And then the lifeguards can say, all right, you out of the water. Sounds good. There is no chemical added to the water in swimming pools that will reveal the presence of urine and catch those who urinate in the pool, except in the movie Grown Ups. And in the movie Grown Ups, yeah, they supposedly had this chemical, and the 5 actors are peeing in the pool all at the same time, and the water turns blue, and it's a hilarious scene. It just ain't true. There is no chemical that turns blue when you pee in it. The core of a wooden pencil is the crushed chemical element lead. Sounds good to me. I mean, that's why we call it lead, right? Because it's lead. Although the core of a wooden pencil is commonly referred to as lead, wooden pencils do not contain the chemical element lead, nor have they ever contained it. Black lead, quote, was formerly a name of graphite, which is commonly used for pencils. So it's graphite, not lead, but unfortunately it was called black lead. Earthquake strength or magnitude is measured using the Richter scale. We all know this to be true, right? Earthquake strength is not commonly measured using the Richter scale. Although the Richter scale was used historically to measure earthquake magnitude, it was found in the 1970s that it does not reliably represent the magnitude of large earthquakes. It has therefore been largely replaced by the moment magnitude scale, although very small earthquakes are still sometimes measured using the Richter scale. Nevertheless, earthquake magnitude is still widely misattributed to the Richter scale. So people still talk about it, even though it hasn't been the official scale since the 1970s. I've heard this. The Amazon rainforest provides 20% of Earth's oxygen. So that's why we shouldn't cut down the rainforest. We'll all suffocate. The Amazon rainforest does not provide 20% of Earth's oxygen. This is a misinterpretation of a 2010 study which found that approximately 34% of photosynthesis by terrestrial plants occurs in tropical rainforest. Due to respiration by the resident organisms, all ecosystems have a net output of oxygen of approximately 0. The oxygen currently present in the atmosphere was accumulated over billions of years. It's not produced by those trees in Brazil. I won't tell you who I'm thinking of right now, but there is a certain individual in the United States that keeps talking about wind turbines are the leading cause of bird deaths in the United States. Those wind turbines, the birds run into them and the turbines come around and they kill billions of birds. They're dangerous. Bird deaths due to wind turbines are extremely rare compared to those caused by cats, buildings, overhead power lines, and pesticides. Only 0.01% of bird deaths are due to wind turbines. Here's the numbers, my friends. Cats kill 4 billion birds a year. Skyscrapers kill 600 million. Power lines kill 25 million birds a year. Pesticides kill 67 million birds. And wind tunnels kill a mere 140,000. So if you want to ban something, you got to get rid of those cats. And we need to tear down those skyscrapers and knock down those power lines. The rate of human population growth is increasing, and we will eventually face overpopulation on this earth. The rate of human population growth is decreasing, and the world population is expected to peak and then begin falling during the 21st century. Improvements in agriculture production and technology are expected to be able to meet the anticipated increased demands for resources, making a global human overpopulation scenario unlikely. Thank goodness. Now, this I believed all my life. My master's degree was in biomechanics. I'm a former football coach, too, high school football coach, and a cross-country coach. Exercise-induced muscle soreness is caused by lactic acid buildup. Yeah, I was always talking about that. That's what makes your muscle sore. You create this acid. It's called lactic acid, and it irritates the nerves in your muscles. Lactic acid. Exercise-induced delayed onset muscle soreness is not caused by lactic acid buildup. Muscular lactic acid levels return to normal levels within an hour after exercise. Delayed onset muscle soreness is thought to be due to microtrauma from unaccustomed or strenuous exercise. In other words, small little tears in the muscles. That's why you're sore. It has nothing to do with the lactic acid. That disappears, but you're still sore the next day. When my wife passed away from cancer, I had been told, and I firmly believed, that I would go through 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. I was told, this is the way it's going to work, Maury. This is what your life is going to be like. The idea that a precise number of stages of grief exist is not supported in peer-reviewed research or objective clinical observations, let alone the 5 stages of grief model. There's just no scientific evidence that this is true. Sounds good. Peer review, this is important. This means that experts reviewed the research and passed judgment that it was valid. Humans can catch warts from toads. I was always told this as a little boy, don't touch that toad, it'll give you warts. Humans cannot catch warts from toads or other animals. The bumps on a toad are not warts. Warts on human skins are caused by the human, I don't know how to pronounce that word, papillomavirus, whatever that is, which is only known to affect humans. Whatever this virus is, only humans get it. It has nothing to do with toads. Oh, I've always believed this. Drinking 8 glasses of water a day is always needed to maintain health. I've heard it 1,000 times. Drinking 8 glasses of water a day is not needed to maintain health. The amount of water needed varies by person, your weight, your diet, your activity level, what kind of clothing you're wearing, and the ambient temperature and humidity. For example, the last few days, it's been near 100 degrees with a heat index over 105 degrees here in my home. And believe me, you would need a lot of water on those days, as opposed to a very cool day of 30 or 40 degrees in the wintertime. Water does not actually need to be drunk in pure form, and it can be derived from liquids such as juices, tea, milk, soups, etc., and you get it from foods including the fruits and vegetables. So, even that cup of coffee I have in the morning, that counts. Most cases of obesity are related to a slower resting metabolism. So the theory goes, well, because you burn fewer calories at rest, when you eat food, the calories are converted to fat, and that's why you're obese. It all has to do with your resting metabolism is too low. You need to get your metabolism up. Most cases of obesity are not related to slower resting metabolism. Resting metabolism rate does not vary much between people. Overweight people tend to underestimate the amount of food they eat, and underweight people tend to overestimate. In fact, overweight people tend to have a faster metabolic rate due to the increased energy required by the larger body. That makes sense. If you weigh 300 pounds, you need more calories than some little person that only weighs 100 pounds. So your metabolism doesn't go down, it goes up when you're fat. Heard this all my life. English-speaking Christian missionaries encourage converts to use the missionary position in the colonial era. And I'll just let it go with that. Okay? So the missionaries taught the natives this is the only proper way to have sexual intercourse. There is no evidence that English-speaking Christian missionaries encouraged converts to use the missionary position in the colonial area. This notion probably originated from the Alfred Kinsey's Sexual Behavior in the Human Male report, which was in 1948, through misunderstanding and misrepresentations of historical documents. So they just read it wrong. I've heard this all my life. A person's hair and fingernails continue to grow after death. Sounds right, sort of. A person's hair and fingernails do not continue to grow after death. Rather, the skin dries and shrinks away from the bases of hairs and nails, giving the appearance of growth. James Watts invented the steam engine. That's what I always heard. James Watts did not invent the steam engine, nor were his ideas on steam engine power inspired by a kettle lid pressure opened by steam. Watts improved upon the already commercially successful Newcomb atmospheric engine, which is this steam engine, but he didn't invent it. The guillotine was named after the French physician Joseph Ignace Guillotine, who invented the guillotine. So this doctor, he is the one that invented the guillotine, right? Nope. Although the guillotine was named after the French physician Joseph Guillotine, he neither invented nor was executed by this device. He died peacefully in his own bed in 1814. Rather, it was Guillotine's speech favoring beheading over other forms of execution that led to the device being referred to as la machine guillotine, and simply later called the guillotine. But he didn't invent it. Thomas Crapper invented the flush toilet. When I first heard this years ago, I thought, wow, well, that makes sense. Yeah, that's why it's called the crapper by some people. Yeah, Thomas Crapper. Sounds good to me. Not true. Thomas Crapper did not invent the flush toilet. A forerunner of the modern toilet was invented by Elizabethan Sir John Harrington in the 16th century. And in 1775, the Scottish mechanic Alexander Cummings. However, Crapper did much to increase the popularity of the flush toilet, and he did introduce several innovations in the late 19th century, the 1800s. And he does hold 9 patents, including one for the floating ball cock. You know, that little ball that floats up and down. He did invent that. Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. We all have heard this. Must be true, got to be true. I've been to his laboratory in Florida. Thomas Edison did not invent the light bulb. The team of inventors Edison employed at his laboratories in Menlo Park, New Jersey, did, however, develop the first practical light bulb in 1880, employing a carbonized bamboo filament. So before this, the filament only lasted a few hours, and they came up the idea of using this carbonized filament, and that was successful. That was their idea. They improved upon the idea of the electric light bulb. Henry Ford invented the assembly line, and that's why he could make those Model Ts so cheaply, right? Henry Ford did not invent either the automobile or the assembly line. He did improve the assembly line processes substantially, sometimes through his own engineering, but more often through sponsoring the work of his employees. In other words, they would come up with ideas and come and say, "Hey, boss, why don't we do this?" And he was the main person behind the introduction of the Model T, which was regarded as the very first affordable automobile made on the assembly line. Oh, we all know this is true. We've seen this in the movies. People sink completely in quicksand. If you stay there long enough, oh, he's going to go under and he's going to drown in quicksand. Just doesn't work that way. Only in the movies. It is not physically possible for a person to completely submerge into quicksand as commonly depicted in fiction. What happens is you will sink down until the upthrust of the wet sand counters the weight of your body. And when that happens, you just sit there and basically you float at that level. But you're not going to go all the way down. The sand is just too thick to let your body sink that far into it. There are people with true photographic memories who can remember every single detail, like taking a picture. We've all heard talk of photographic memories. And I know something about this because one of my professors in college did a lot of research in memory, short-term and long-term memory. So I knew this wasn't true. True photographic memory has never been demonstrated to exist in any individual, although a small number of young children have eidetic memory. And what that means is they can recall an object with high precision for a few minutes after it is no longer present. Many people have claimed to have a photographic memory, but those people have been shown to have high precision memories as a result of mnemonic devices. Mnemonic devices are ways that you trick yourself to remember something, rather than a natural capacity for detailed memory encoding. There are rare cases of individuals with exceptional memory, but none of them have a memory that mimics that of a camera. So photographic memory, just a word. We all heard about this. The Bermuda Triangle has a far more shipwrecks or mysterious disappearances than most other waterways. And the Bermuda Triangle is from Miami to Puerto Rico up here to Bermuda. So, all these ships and planes disappear in here. Vast numbers of them, right? Wrong. According to the U.S. Coast Guard records, the Bermuda Triangle does not have any more shipwrecks or mysterious disappearances than any other waterway. Just plain old water out there. Now, I was guilty of this one myself. In one of my YouTubes, I told the story of this woman and I showed this picture. And at the time, I thoroughly believed this was true. This is a picture of a woman who gave birth to 69 children. Now, this has been documented. I mean, the Guinness Book of World Records and Wiki and other research that I could find, they verify that this woman, Valentina Veleshyev, Russian, between the years of 1725 and 1765, gave birth to 16 pair of twins, 7 sets of triplets, and 4 sets of quadruplets. 69 children in all this woman gave birth to. And this was supposedly the picture, and I found it in numerous places on the internet, all with this picture of this woman who claimed to be this. Here's the problem with this picture. Now, this is 1725 to 1765, right? And she died in 1775. Here's the problem. Photography wasn't invented until 1827. So how can you have this picture when photography didn't come along until almost 70 years later? Not only that, I also found this. This was supposedly a picture of her children. Okay, yeah, in one of the websites, this is a picture of her children. But if you look at this, all these people, all these little kids are all the same age. And she gave birth during a 40-year period. So there ought to be some people in here that are at least 40 years old. And they're not. They're all little kids. So that's obviously a fake picture. And once again, you can't take a picture in 1725 because photography didn't come along until 1827. Here's another picture I found, supposedly of her children. Oh, I love this one. This is supposedly her children. So look here. Here's a baby. Here's a baby. Here's an old man with a beard. These are all supposedly her children. Yeah, right. Here's a baby. Look at these young kids here. Look at these full-grown adults here. Look at this old woman. Here's my point. And this is a quote, a direct quote. You can't believe everything you see on the internet. And who said that? Abraham Lincoln. And I will leave you with that. Thanks for watching. I hope you had some fun and learned some things you didn't know. Be well.